Hello and welcome to Project LPAC and Lake Research Partners 2022 research presentation, Voter Attitudes Towards Transgender Rights and Legislation. My name is Lisa Turner, Executive Director of LPAC. Before we get started, let me give a special thank you to the major donors who supported this project: Tawani Foundation, Agnes Gunn, Joy Bunson, Edie Coffrin, Lori Shedler and Mary Snyder, Laura Ricketts and Brooke Skinner Ricketts, and Alex Ritchie. I also want to recognize the organizations who lent their time, expertise, and assisted in the design of this project. Thank you goes to Gill Foundation, National Center for Transgender Equality, Athlete Ally, and ASO Communications. Let me go back a little bit. This project came about because of the 2020 election cycle. LPAC endorsed congressional candidate Gina Ortiz-Jones, running for Texas 23, was attacked by the NRCC, who stated that her support for transgender rights was a radical danger to constituents in her Texas district. These attacks on an openly LGBTQ woman of color were too much to not do something about. Then former President Trump stood up at the CPAC conference last February and said that transgender youth athletes posed a threat to hard-fought rights for girls in sports, including the status of Title IX. And in 2021, it just kept getting worse. 34 states introduced over 100 anti-LGBTQ bills targeting transgender youth and individuals in state legislatures across the country. And in just the last few weeks of 2022, conservatives have brought this issue up again. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem released a national television ad and went on Fox News to highlight a transgender athlete ban that she signed into law last week on February 3rd. It is clear that the conservative right has a wedge issue they are working to exploit to divide women, progressives, and even our own LGBTQ community. This issue has become politicized, but it also goes to the work LPAC feels is a responsibility to lift our community and support the allies that we need in organizations, boardrooms, and serving in public office. As a reminder, we are not able to give advice or say anything specific about individual campaigns or candidates. We are here to talk about the trends we see in the research and hope that in addition to candidates and those that support them, this will also be of interest to academics, researchers, and students. So now let me turn it over to Celinda Lake. She needs no introduction, but let me say that she has been at the forefront of research for women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and progressive issues for over 3 decades. The clients at Lake Research Partners are among the who's who of political superstars, including our current president. Let me hand over the presentation to one of the most important researchers of our time, Celinda Lake. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that really generous introduction. And I really want to thank LPAC for the important work that they do and the application, dissemination of this important information, and LPAC and its donors for really putting the kind of resources into a project like this to truly make progress going forward. If we look at the I also want to thank our team at Lake Research Partners, headed by Alicia Snell, Kate Gormley, and Jesse Klein, and Izzy Vineyard, who's on the call here, for their tremendous contribution intellectually and substantively in getting this work done. So if we look at the methodology that we employed, and we look at the next slide, this was an online survey done in October 2021, 800 registered voters nationwide and 600 registered voters in swing congressional districts. There was a small amount of waiting to adjust the sample, but and the error on the sample is plus or minus 3.5%. We also did a before survey, a couple of online focus groups so that we could get a sense of the language and the connections that people were making. And I think that our survey was vastly improved by doing these focus groups. You can see that they were done across congressional districts, separated by men and women, and a mix of race, age, education, and partisanship. In terms of our overall findings, first of all, a third of the voters know someone personally who is transgender, and that is correlated with having more positive views about transgender policies. But over half of voters are concerned about discrimination toward transgender people. And we have seen just a steady increase in support for transgender policies and transgender people, even as the right has tried again and again to use this as a wedge issue. The plurality of voters say they would be more likely to vote for a candidate who stood up for transgender rights and inclusivity. A strong majority of voters are on our side when we talk about discrimination, housing, credit, education, public spaces, and healthcare. And voters sincerely and intensely want to end discrimination in public policy when it comes to transgender issues. This is a mixed bag, though. There is some strength on the other side as well. And certainly sports, and to a lesser extent, locker room policies are the most difficult issues for us. And particularly when it comes to sports, even our base Democrats are not sure what's the fair thing to do. We are in the strongest position when we start by talking about values. There's a lot of core, powerful values on our side: freedom, respect, trust, opportunity, authentic selves, and belonging. Our messages are strong, and all of our messages beat the opposition message. And I want to thank ASO Communications for their help in developing these messages, as well as Lisa and Matt at LPAC. It is important early on to establish messaging around common experience and shared values. We also, and this was a brilliant suggestion on the part of LPAC, we tested not only general messaging, but candidate responses to attacks. And that was really an important thing to do, because the candidates are getting attacked pretty readily. But we found very strong messages there as well, invoking belonging, the golden rule, and unity over division. After seeing values-based messages, voters were more likely to support a candidate who is a champion of transgender rights and inclusivity. And very important thing that has always been a part of LPAC's research, and I really praise them for having this sophistication. In all of the research we've done for LPAC, they've always looked at backlash. Very, very important thing to do. And we found no backlash here, and we'll show you that data. So let's look at the details that drew us to these conclusions and see if you agree on our conclusions. So first of all, if we look at just the context in which we're operating, 33% of people say that, yes, they know someone who is transgender. 63% say they don't, or they don't know that they do. Notice LGBTQ folks all knowing someone transgender, 64%, very, very broad support. Younger people under 50 knowing, splitting, almost half knowing someone transgender. Women tending to know someone, more likely to know someone who is transgender. Parents very familiar with people who are transgender. And interestingly, people of color, particularly African American and Latinx, having strong familiarity with someone who is transgender. So some interesting patterns here. Not a lot of geographic differences, by the way, that couldn't be explained by other differences. And when people talked about in the focus groups their knowledge of transgender people, they say they have grown, if we look at the next slide, they've grown significantly more comfortable with transgender people, despite not fully understanding what it means to be transgender. And people acknowledge there's a lot of confusion here. I'm not exactly sure. I know about the pronouns. Young people are bringing this issue to the forefront, and people not exactly sure and still debating how to handle these issues. Voters, if we look at the next slide, hold mutually contradictory views and usually deeply resent having it pointed out to them. So 60% of voters say there are two genders, men and women, determined by biological sex assigned at birth. By the same trend or same time, 61% of people say to truly do better as a society, we must accept people no matter their race, background, or gender identity. So a lot of people holding what you might think of as contradictory views and really responding to whether we are talking about hurting people or the damaging impact of redefining gender versus hurting people and the damaging impact of how we accept and treat other people. So people really tussling with this. Where there is great clarity, and people have moved a lot in the next slide, is when it comes to the area of discrimination. 53% of people say they are concerned about discrimination towards transgender people. And the intensity is more on the concern side than the non-concern side. And the patterns relate to whether you know someone transgender, but also whether you're young, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a dad, whether you're a person of color, and whether you are LGBTQ. Also, interestingly, this is not an issue that completely lines up with religion. It used to, but it doesn't anymore. And there are quite a few people who are attending religious services who say they know someone transgender and who say that they are concerned about discrimination against transgender people. People agree overwhelmingly that transgender people are being attacked today and threatened. And when they're provided with information, the intensity goes up even more. But even before that, we have a lot of awareness of this issue. And this is a time when people are checking out. They're not paying much attention. They hate politics. And yet there's quite a bit of information about transgender attacks, and people don't like it. What are the attitudes about equality, leaders, and policies? First of all, we asked people, okay, and this is before any messaging. We said to people, how would you feel if someone made a statement, if an elected official made a statement in support of transgender people? And the dominant emotions are, I would feel fine, I would feel neutral, I would feel happy, I would feel proud. Those are the biggest emotions. And you can see for Democrats, it's overwhelmingly fine and happy. For independents, it's fine and neutral. For Democrats, for Republicans, I mean, a lot of people who say fine and neutral as well. We also have some folks who say they would be disappointed, but those people tend to be older Republicans, a huge age gap among Republicans. And on the transgender issues, we can really get some movement from Republican parents and from young Republicans, younger people who identify as Republicans. If we look at the next slide, a plurality say they would be more likely to vote for a candidate who stood for transgender rights and inclusivity. 43% say that, 27% strongly. And a third say it would not make any difference. Only 21% of voters say that they would be less likely to vote for a candidate who stood up for transgender rights and inclusivity. And frankly, every time we poll on this issue, things are getting better. People are really moving on this issue, thanks to the conversations, despite the wedge politics that we're seeing. The people who are most motivated are base again. LGBTQ voters, people who know someone transgender, dads, younger voters, people of color, Democrats, moms, and again, those folks who attend religious services. Republicans voters are split. So half of Republicans less likely, but half of Republicans more likely. So we're seeing some wedge there, particularly again with Republican parents and with younger Republicans. Again, we see competing norms. So when we ask, how do you feel about elected officials who support transgender rights and exclusivity? Do you think they're doing the right thing, or do you think they're going too far? And by 22 points, people say, I think they're doing the right thing. 53% of people say, I think they're doing the right thing. When we ask people, our elected officials who support recognizing and respecting the biological differences between boys and girls doing the right thing or going too far, you have a similar number, 52% who say doing the right thing, 22% who say going too far. So again, we see this central issue in this area that people are on the move in our direction, but they are also very conflicted. They are holding competing norms right now, and it is our job to tap into the norms that move people in our direction. What are some of those statements and policies that move people, and how much are we winning them by? So there are competing norms on policies as well. The very best testing policy, and what we should be overwhelmingly saying we're for, is ensuring transgender people are protected from discrimination in employment, housing, credit, education, public spaces and services, federally funded programs, jury service, and healthcare. 73% of people support that, 35% strongly, only 12% oppose those laws. That is just a very, very broad norm. And what's interesting is we threw the kitchen sink in there, except for sports. And you'll see people are like, yeah, that, yes, that too, yes, that too. I hadn't thought about that, but yes, that too. So very, very broad support on discrimination. Where we see more challenges are when we get to the area of athletics. And here we start to lose some of our women who have supported Title IX all their lives and are just worried about people being able to compete and women being able to win where we are in student athletics. Protecting the fairness of women's athletics by requiring student athletes to play on sport teams that match the sex they were born. 63% of people support that, 35% strongly, 22% are undecided, and only 15% oppose it. We're getting a lot of cross pressures when we have sports. We're much better off when we're talking about just kind of school sports, not a competitive arena, and the things that everyone gets from sports: teamwork, respect, sportsman-like behavior. People think, yeah, everybody in, doesn't matter what team you're playing on. But when you're talking about competitiveness, we start to get people feeling more conflicted and not knowing what to do. We also have some energy around the transgender treatment and procedures and requiring and allowing healthcare providers the freedom to refuse treatment. This is an area we've done a whole nother set of research in. And while people are 57% in favor of this, we also get 57% in favor of putting patients first, giving them the healthcare that they need, following through on the Hippocratic Oath. So there's a lot. This is a debate, and we have a lot of winning norms on our side as well. Locker rooms, a little bit scary to people. Interestingly, locker rooms are tougher for us than bathrooms. Bathrooms, people are like, this is ridiculous. Let's just get moving on this. Have you ever flown in a plane? Why can't we just have family bathrooms? Why can't we have bathrooms that accommodate everybody? This is just getting absurd. Why can't we have more bathrooms? People think the bathroom issue is just really, really overstated. But locker rooms, they are a little bit more concerned about. And then allowing healthcare providers to refuse to provide treatment like sex change that goes against their religious beliefs. That is also an area where we see some division. So we have a very strong norm in terms of discrimination. We frankly have a very tough area when it comes to competitive athletics. And then we have a whole bunch of areas where people are on the move and kind of split. And it depends on how we talk about it and how we frame the issue. Because people are divided, when we talk about locker rooms and talk about banning transgender youth from locker rooms that align with the gender they live in every day, less than a majority of people are in favor of this. Only 26% strongly in favor of it. A lot of people unclear about the locker room issue. When we talk about the healthcare, and whether we're talking about hormone blockers or young people who are transgender being in locker rooms, people are divided. So in a lot of the areas of locker rooms and healthcare, people are really divided. They're just unsure. They're not, and it really depends. They feel perfectly saying, I support this policy and I support this contradictory policy too, because I'm really not sure what to do. People are absolutely opposed to banning affirming medical care for transgender use. I'm sorry, if we look at the post slide, 39% favor that. Everyone else is 40% opposed to it. People really against providing affirming medical care for transgender youth and people and transgender adults for that matter as well. People really think just provide health care. This is absurd. You need to provide health care. In terms of our value statement, so we do need messaging. We have people on the move in our direction, but we have people holding a lot of conflicting ideas and having a lot and readily admitting that they're not sure where they come down on a lot of these issues. So we need messaging. We need to get our messages out, and we start the most powerful messages always start with values, and that's true in this case as well. Our values test much stronger than their values, and we have a lot of values on our side. Our values tap into camaraderie, golden rule, freedom, personal decision making free from political interference, respect, authenticity, and dignity. These are very, very strong values. And you can see here these values incorporated into core statements. And we're not getting 51% of the people agreeing with us. We're getting 73 to 82% of the people agreeing with us, and 38 to 44% of the people strongly agreeing with us. And notice it is a minuscule proportion of people, 5 to 10%, who disagree with us on these statements. So we are on very strong terrain when we invoke values. And it's really important that we start with the values before we get into the policies. Frame these values up so that they are front and center for people in their minds. Some of the values that test quite strongly, transgender or not, most of us want pretty similar things: good health, happiness, a sense of belonging, strong relationships. We're all parents, children, siblings, friends, colleagues, and neighbors. Each of us should have the freedom to be ourselves, no matter what we look like, where we're from, or our gender. Transgender youth, along with their parents and doctors, should be able to make their own personal medical decisions. This should not be controlled by politicians. And notice we're not hiding the ball here. We're saying transgender. In some cases, it's the very first word we say, and people are responding to us very, very strongly. There is a second tier of values for us around political power and division, freedom versus essentialism, access to activities, respecting, trusting, empowering to make decisions, and protecting from discrimination. And these are strong values as well. They're a little less intense, but they're still reaching 2/3 plus of the voters. The one value that we're finding people really cross-pressured is competitive sports. We need to keep sports competitive. Boys are faster and stronger than girls, and letting a male to female transgender athlete compete against girls is not fair to those girls. 65% agree with that. People are really torn on the competitive athletics. And frankly, we need some more work on that. But otherwise, when we're talking about transgender youth want the opportunity to play sports for the same reasons other young people do, be a part of a team, be where they belong, 69% agree with that. And then when we're in other areas like discrimination, like being who you are, like being respected, having the freedom to be who you are, people are strongly on our side. So let's look at what we did. And how we combine these values into message statements. And the first thing we looked at is our overall message triangle, and that's the next slide. And you see here, starting with a message on authentic selves, belonging, and this new metaphor that was really powerful and was very powerful in some work we did for the Transgender Youth Center of boxes and freedom. They always invoke freedom. This is an area where we can invoke freedom and not putting people into boxes based on what they look like, where they're from, or what their gender is. That was a very powerful metaphor to people. How do these messages work? And why do they work? Let's show you how the movement. So first we establish a shared value. Do that before you get into the problem. Do that before you get into the policy. No matter what we look like, where we're from, we want to be treated with dignity and respect. Across our races and backgrounds, we want the freedom to be ourselves. Whatever our color, background, gender, or zip code, transgender or not, we pretty much want the same things. All of those shared values, shared experience. It helps a lot, particularly in a political debate, to call out their divisive tactics and to say they're turning us against each other. We know deep down it's wrong for a person in power to tell someone you don't belong. They're trying to distract us by singling out transgender youth from their peers. People hate the division right now, and reminding them that this is an essential divide and conquer tactic is really, really powerful to voters. Naming the villain is also important. And the villain here is a handful of lawmakers who are trying to single out and exclude our youth. Then we invoke what the solution is. We're going to work together. We're going to create a unity of purpose by describing people working together. By joining together, we all deserve. We can have a legacy of kindness and consideration, or dignity and respect, in which the next generation can take pride. Invoking transgender people, talking about gender identity is very important here. We need to respect each other for who we are, transgender or not. We need to support all young people to be their authentic selves, no matter what their gender. We need to include transgender youth. All of that language testing very, very positively. And then don't dwell on the problems, but provide a positive call to action around unity and change. We can ensure freedom. We can end discrimination. We can make it illegal. We can empower people. I'm talking about we and being together, very, very powerful for people. If we divide the people right now, if we look at the next slide, we have 41% of people who are in our base. They're with us from hello. We have 15% of people who are in our opposition. Frankly, given what these people believe, we don't want them coming to our birthday party anyway. And it's only 15% of the people. Remember, our base is 3 times their base, which you would never know from the current political dialogue. And then we have 18% of the people who shift in our direction. Now, people are cross-pressured. So some of the people shift away from us as well. But again, we have 3 times the number of people who shift in our direction and shift away from us. The next thing we did is one of the things I always like the best. It's the funnest part. It's the dials of the messages. And you'll see here on the next slide a summary table where we dialed a bunch of messages. This is the first set of ratings are the conscious ratings. The second set of ratings are the unconscious ratings. Where we have bias, the unconscious ratings are usually lower than the conscious ratings. So we do have bias here. We're not kidding ourselves about what we're facing, but notice, consciously or unconsciously, we are soundly beating the opposition's message. If we look at the next slide, we can see our strongest message, which is our authentic selves. The orange line, the yellow line is everybody. The blue line is our targets, and the red lines are their targets. Think about how you would dial, where you're dialing up if you like what you hear and down if you dislike what you hear. And let's see how the voters approved of this message. The language is to the right.
No matter what we look like or where we are from, we want to be treated with dignity and respect. But today, certain politicians are pushing laws that restrict our freedoms because of the color of our skin, what's in our wallets, or because we are transgender, so they can deny us the basic rights, resources, and respect all people deserve. They divide us instead of uniting us, so we turn against some group instead of joining together to demand what our families need. By rejecting this division, we can ensure all of us have the freedom to be ourselves, pursue our dreams, and have a good life. No exceptions.
So the blue line's dialing up very fast initially and dialing, pretty steadily up. The red line's dialing down. And again, remember that red line is only 15% of the people. And they are people who want to defend politicians who divide us, who are anti-transgender people, who think people should be denied basic rights, and think not everyone deserves a good life. As I said, these are not people you want as your next door neighbor or to invite to your birthday party. We would have to wonder what we were saying to them to get them to agree. Notice some of the things that people really like here. No matter what you look like, where you come from, we all want to be treated with dignity and respect. Freedom to be ourselves and pursue our dreams, and have a good life, no exceptions. Interestingly, the no exception language really, really strong with millennials. Young people really believe there should not be exceptions. Those are the unconscious data. Look at the conscious data, and we can see we're getting really high ratings here in the 80s and 70s. And again, some of the same things working. So the one shortfall is that this message plateaus a little bit. One of the things that was very revealing about this research, we often think we have to go on and on and on and on, right? A 9-second soundbite is an anathema to many of us. Well, actually, here it turns out we didn't have to go on and on and on. People got it pretty much in the beginning, and they agreed with us at the end. They were fine with our middle language, but they said, "You had me at hello." And so, what's interesting is people really are responding and moving in our direction, and we don't have to go on and on and on about our language. The next message was belonging. This was also quite strong, beat the opposition, had some of the same themes, but really, really appealed to some of the swing women. And let's see what people said.
Whatever our color, background, gender, or zip code, deep down, we all know it's wrong for a person in power to tell someone you don't belong. Yet, right now, certain politicians, having failed us and left millions struggling to make ends meet, are trying to distract us by singling out transgender youth from their peers. These politicians are picking and choosing which children can have the education, childhood, and community we all deserve, just because they don't fit into the rigid boxes of how they think a boy or girl should be. Together, we can make this a place where we are all free to be ourselves and feel like we belong in our communities.
Again, notice those blue lines. Now, this is an interesting message because we hold the opposition here a little bit longer than the other message. But when we say we shouldn't single out transgender youth and their peers, they dial down. They want to single out transgender youth. The rest of the public really angry about that. They do not. And the youth aspect of this messaging and transgender youth really, really powerful with voters. We all deserve certain things, and the belonging language very, very popular here. And if we look at the next slide, we can see the strong conscious ratings as well. So again, very, very strong language around belonging, particularly strong with women, and very, very strong to bring out what's happening with transgender youth. People really rally around transgender youth. The final best testing message for us was this new metaphor of boxes and freedom. And again, started to develop this with the Transgender Youth Center and ASO, and then tried this again here. And it's really powerful. It's a really powerful metaphor for people.
Across our races and backgrounds, we want the freedom to be ourselves. But certain people in power try to put us in boxes based on what we look like, where we're from, or our genders. They divide us, whether it is some schools that send only girls home for the way they are dressed, or it is certain politicians who pass laws to ban abortion with no exceptions for rape or incest, or deny health care for transgender people, or restrict activities for transgender youth. Together, We can reject these divisions and ensure each of us has the freedom to be ourselves and move through our communities with dignity.
Notice how people really like that language of freedom to be ourselves and move through our communities. And notice the fast takeoff here. You want a fast takeoff because in today's 9-second soundbite and 140 characters, you need to take off fast before people quit on you. Notice also that we're saying certain politicians, certain people in power. We're not condemning everyone, but we are calling it out, and it's quite an effective strategy. And the other thing that was pretty exciting was notice in each of these messages, we're connecting transgender issues to other issues like healthcare, rape and incest, resources for our schools. And people are not rejecting those connections. They aren't thinking of this as a separate policy that I want to put off in the corner. They're seeing it essentially tied to all of these issues and accepting our broader framing here of the issue. Same thing for the next slide, which just shows you that the conscious ratings are quite high. Sports. Again, we have made a lot of progress on sports, not enough, frankly. We are bringing together, we can make sports, when we talk about sports as what are the qualities you learn in sports, then we make a lot of progress. When we're in the arena of competitive sports, we still have some progress we need to make. We still have some refinement we need to work. But it's nice to notice that the message is not, this area is not complete disaster, that we have some openings here. Look for the language, look where people dial up and down.
Youth learn a lot of life lessons through sports. They learn leadership, confidence, self-respect, and what it means to be part of and work with a team. Transgender youth deserve the same chances to learn teamwork, sportsmanship, leadership, and self-discipline, and to build a sense of belonging with their peers. When we tell transgender girls that they can't play girl sports, or transgender boys that they can't play boy sports, they miss out on this important childhood experience. As a country, we decided long ago that discrimination is wrong and that everyone should have the same opportunities to succeed in life, and that should include transgender youth.
So a couple of things that are interesting here. When we're talking about what you get out of sports, everyone agrees, including the opposition for that matter. When we talk about, when we bring in transgender youth, we see some dialing down with our swing, the people who move toward us. They are feeling cross-pressured. Our base stays with us. They're there. And 41%, remember, of the electorate is our base. At the end, everyone should have the opportunities to succeed in life, including transgender youth, very strong support with our swing and our base. Notice the opposition doesn't agree. They don't agree that everyone should have the same opportunities to succeed, including transgender youth. Again, this is 15% of the population, 20% with their swing. These are not people we're going to get. And these are people we'd have to wonder what we would say to get them. But that leaves 80% of the population open for us for this conversation. You can see here in the messaging, the base is responding strongly. The swing, the toward more likely, a little more cross-pressured. They're really torn by what is fair, and they're really torn by how can I give transgender youth the opportunity to learn in sports and still give girls the opportunity to win in sports. And that is an area that is invoked more in competitive athletics than it is in school sports and just, PE, but something that we're going to have to continue to do some work on. Here is the opposition message. And you will see their message works with their base, but doesn't work at all with our voters and doesn't work very strong with even their swing.
Common sense Americans want to protect the values that make our country great. But today, our American way of life where you work hard, play by the rules, and raise your children with strong values, is under attack. By rejecting the truth that there are two genders, men and women, liberal extremists are going too far in their relentless push for power to replace our way of life. We must ensure our children are raised to love our country, preserve our freedoms, and think for themselves, not bow down to extremists. We need to protect our children, our communities, and our way of life.
So two things about this. It's very strong with their base. It tests less strong overall than any of our messages. And the two places it fails is the swing voters and our base do not believe that things are under attack. And people feel overwhelmingly that we should, that liberal extremists are not endangering everyone. So there are two good opportunities here where they are just pushing things too far and appealing to their base. They are pushing things too far for everyone else. You'll notice the same thing is true with the ratings on the next slide, which is that they're unifying their base for sure. Remember, their base is only 15% of the population, and they're even having some troubles with their swing. Last thing we're going to look at is the answers for the candidates to give. And it's really pretty exciting how well this works. And again, real credit to LPAC for thinking about this aspect of the research, which we don't often do, and which is very, very important in this issue area because so many of our candidates are under attack. We tested two different kinds of responses. The golden rule response, which you can read here, and which is, pretty typical as you would imagine, very, very powerful with voters, and the affirm and pivot. Now, this is the voice of a candidate, right? And the candidate is saying they can attack me if they want. I was elected to serve all the people in our state, and that includes transgender people who are friends, neighbors, family, and coworkers. They should be treated like anyone else. Instead of focusing on divisive statements, we should be focusing our attention on getting people back to work, getting affordable health care for our hardworking families, and guaranteeing all children a quality education. Both of these messages work similarly. Both of these messages much stronger than the attack, and both of these messages off the charts. Let's go look at those ratings. Here you can see a summary table. And can I tell you, having a dirty little secret here, having done a lot of candidate research right now, candidates would kill for an average rating at 84 right now. These are really, really high numbers. This isn't just a good response. These are some of the strongest things that candidates can say. Let's look at the dials on the two responses, and you'll see how incredibly strongly they work.
They can attack me if they want. I was elected to serve all people in our state, and that includes transgender people who are our friends, neighbors, family, and co-workers. They should be treated like anyone else. Instead of focusing on divisive statements, we should be focusing our attention on getting people back to work, getting affordable health care to our hardworking families, and guaranteeing all children a quality education.
And if you look at the ratings here, notice that light red line, we're even getting their swing vote on this candidate response. People that we don't have agree with us overall in the transgender debate are liking this candidate response. The only people that don't like it are their strong opposition, 15% of the population. And again, you can see in the conscious ratings, very, very strong report, and half of the swing, their swing coming our way, more than 3/4 of our swing coming our way. And finally, the golden rule, which people, as trite as it may sound, people really, really respond to.
We should treat everyone as we would want to be treated. Allowing transgender people to be singled out and treated differently denies them the respect and dignity we'd expect if we were in their shoes. Some politicians are trying to tell transgender people how they should feel and how they should live. I'm tired of the division, and people I talk to are tired of being divided. I'll always care about all the people in our state.
As you can see, again, their swing, we're even splitting our voters overwhelmingly in response. The only people not, the 15% who are really anti-transgender people. And if you look at the next slide, again, very, very strong conscious and unconscious ratings. So what do we respond with when we're attacked? When they say X supports transgender people, a radical sexual agenda, a liberal agenda, radicalizing America, costing us our way of life, we have a ton of responses. We can respond, I was elected to serve all of the people in our state, and that includes transgender people who are our friends, neighbors, family, and coworkers. Remember early on in the data when people said, yeah, transgender people are my friends, neighbors, family, and coworkers. The golden rule. We should treat everyone as we would want to be treated. I always care about all of the people in our state. And unity. Remember, the villain here are certain politicians who want to divide us, who want to deflect attention from their failures. Allowing transgender people to be singled out and treated differently denies them the respect and dignity we'd expect if we were in their shoes. Or the politician can say, I'm tired of the division, and the people I talk to are tired of being divided. So again, very, very, very strong language here, coming from groups or coming from politicians. What happened at the end? So we have really strong messages here, but what happened in the end? Well, a lot of things happened were really strong. First of all, we increased our support across party identification. Across party identification, people were more likely to vote for a candidate who stood up for transgender rights and inclusivity. While it was not our primary goal to influence attitudes about gender identity, it was more to defend ourselves and our politicians. It turned out we did. By engaging in this debate, we improved our situation in terms of gender identity. People were less likely to align with a gender essentialist view and more likely to align with a view that gender is determined by each individual, regardless of sex assigned at birth. There was no backlash. We found no backlash in terms of people moving away from us, even though there were still some people that had conflicting views. They did not backlash. They did not choose to vote against us or move against us on core attitudes or on support for our politicians. The next slide shows you the gains. Notice we're making huge gains with Democrats from 59 to 77%, substantial gains with independents from 33% to 42%. And even among Republicans, we're picking up. Republicans were divided, and now our candidate who supports transgender rights, even among Republicans, is going from 28% to 38%. So, and beating those who are less likely to support. Similarly, on gender identity, this is the debate about, is gender determined by who you know yourself to be, or there are only two genders? We picked up among Democrats 47 to 55, among independents from 27% to 43%. Huge seat change with independents. And from Republicans, we didn't make as much gains, but we went from 20 to 28%. Gender is determined by who we know ourselves to be. It wasn't our goal to change these attitudes, but it's very, very affirming to know that we are doing that. And finally, what are the conclusions here? We can win these debates. Our messages tested better than their messages. There was no backlash in talking about being in favor of rights and inclusion for transgender people. Voters report feeling fine, neutral, and happy if an elected official made a statement in support of transgender people. Values, and starting with values, is always our strongest message opportunity. And here the values of freedom, respect, trust, opportunity, authentic selves, and belonging really worked in our favor. Very, very important to establish early on common experience, shared values. And remember, a lot of people think, I have transgender people in my friendship network, in my kids' friends, in the people I know at work, in my next door neighbors, in my community. Always, always, always make sure this is about the voters. And whether you're an elected official and candidate, or whether you are just engaging in this debate, it is important that this is about the people and the inclusion and the rights of transgender people and what we want for our communities, rather than, oh me, oh my, the poor candidate who's being attacked. So I think you'll agree, very rich research, couldn't have been done without substantial research and commitment and intellectual expertise from LPAC. And it's been a pure privilege to be part of this really important work.
Thank you, Celinda. Oh my gosh. I'm always in awe of the work that you and everyone at LRP does. I mean, it's just such a privilege for us to partner with you over these past several years with, the polling and the focus groups and the information and data, and really empirical data that we now can really help our whole community know more about, and empower also now with this research voters and candidates to be able to know it's okay to go out and support all the values that we always believed would be true and good for all of us. So thank you so much. And I also want to give a special shout out to Matt Foraker, who is always behind the scenes, but is such an integral part. He's my colleague here at Project LPAC at LPAC, who makes all of this really happen for the organization. And thank you to all of you for watching. And if you want to learn more about this work and other research that we have done with Lake Research Partners, please go to projectlpac.org. And thank you all again for everything. Appreciate it.